three ungrateful children had no idea what they had just thrown away. When Robert, Sandra, and Benjamin pushed their 70-year-old parents out of the black Mercedes onto a blistering, deserted highway, they thought they were finally purging a burden. They left Rose and Anthony in the 100-degree heat with nothing but 2 small bags of old clothes and a heart that was skipping beats. "You're too expensive to keep," Sandra had hissed, her voice as sharp as a razor, before slamming the door and speeding off into the distance. But as the dust settled on that lonely road, the siblings didn't realize they had just made a $20 million mistake. For 3 long years, Sandra, the cold-hearted accountant, had been intercepting her father's mail. She saw the medical bills. She saw the utility notices. But she had hidden the one letter that truly mattered. The official notice that Anthony was the sole heir to a massive real estate empire left by a grandfather they had all forgotten. By the time those 3 siblings realized that their burdens were actually billionaires, the locks on the family mansion would be changed, and a total stranger would be sitting in their father's chair. Rose woke up that morning with a heaviness in her chest that had nothing to do with her age. It was the second Tuesday of the month, the day the bills usually arrived. After 50 years of marriage and raising 3 children in that very house, Rose had developed a sixth sense for the atmosphere of a home. She knew the difference between a house that was peaceful and a house that was waiting for you to leave. As she lay there, she listened to the rough, labored breathing of her husband, Anthony. Anthony was a man of the earth. His hands were thick and calloused, the skin etched with the permanent stains of a lifetime of labor. He had built this house with his own 2 hands, brick by brick, beam by beam. He had worked double shifts at the factory and weekends at construction sites just to ensure that Robert went to law school. Sandra became an accountant, and Benjamin never had to go a day without a new pair of shoes. Now, those same children walked past him in the hallway as if he were a piece of furniture that had gone out of style. Rose climbed out of bed, her knees popping in the quiet room. She moved to the kitchen, the heart of the home she had tended for 5 decades. She moved with a quiet efficiency, reaching for the carton of eggs. She cracked 3. Exactly 3. She was always calculating these days. 2 eggs for Anthony, because his heart was failing and he needed the protein to keep his strength up. Half an egg for herself. The remaining half she would save, just in case one of the children felt hungry before work. She was still standing at the stove when the clicking of high heels echoed on the tile. It was Sandra. At 42, Sandra was a woman who moved through life like she was conducting an audit. She didn't offer a "good morning, Mama." She didn't ask how Rose had slept. Instead, she walked straight to the counter and stared at the frying pan, as if the eggs were stealing money directly from her bank account. 3 eggs, Mom? Really? Sandra's voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. Do you have any idea what we spend on groceries in this house? Between the organic milk you insist on and Dad's heart medication, we're bleeding cash. Robert and I were looking at the spreadsheets last night. It's not sustainable. Rose didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the yellow yolks, her hands steady. Your father worked 40 years so you would never have to count eggs, Sandra. Sit down. I'll make you a plate. I eat at the office, Sandra snapped, dropping a thick folder of papers onto the kitchen table with a heavy, aggressive thud. And speaking of the office, I spent my lunch break looking at Sunrise. It's a facility 40 minutes from here. It's clean, it's professional, and frankly, it's where you and Dad belong. We can't keep coming home to a house that smells like old people and medicine. The word medicine hung in the air like a threat. Rose turned then, her apron dusted with flour, and looked at her daughter. She tried to find the little girl who used to cry whenever she scraped her knee, the one who used to hide behind Rose's skirts when strangers came to the door. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw her parents as a liability on a balance sheet. "This is your father's house," Rose said softly. "Technically," Sandra countered, her eyes narrowing. "The deed was moved into a family trust 3 years ago for tax purposes. Don't you remember signing those papers, Mom? Robert handled it. It's our house now, and we've decided we need the space." Before Rose could respond, the front door swung open. Robert and Benjamin walked in. They didn't knock. Nobody knocked anymore. It was the slow disappearance of small courtesies that hurt Rose the most. They treated the house like a hotel where the staff stayed for free. Robert was dressed in a suit that cost more than Anthony's first car, and Benjamin was trailing behind him, looking at his phone, completely indifferent to the tension in the room. "Is the car packed?" Robert asked, looking at Sandra. "Just their small bags," Sandra replied. "I told them they couldn't take the old furniture. It's full of dust and allergens. We'll buy them new things once they're settled." Anthony appeared in the doorway then, leaning heavily on his walking stick. He looked at his 3 children. His pride and joy, the people he had sacrificed his health to provide for. He heard the word settled, and he knew exactly what it meant. It was a polite word for discarded. "I'm not going to a warehouse, Robert," Anthony said, his voice gravelly but firm. "I built these walls. I laid the foundation of this kitchen. You played hide and seek in that hallway. You think you can just pack us up like old books?" Robert sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable child. "Dad, don't make this a scene. The grandchildren are coming over later, and we don't want them to see you like this. It's for your own safety. What if you fall? What if Mom forgets the stove is on? We're doing this because we love you." The lie was so thick it was almost suffocating. Rose looked at Benjamin, the youngest. Surely he would say something. He was the one she had stayed up with for 3 nights straight when he had the croup. He was the one who used to call her his best girl. But Benjamin just kept his eyes on his screen, muttering that the facility had a great TV package and they'd be fine. They didn't give them time to pack the wedding photos. They didn't let Rose grab the Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. Within 30 minutes, Robert had grabbed their 2 small suitcases, the cheap ones they had bought for a weekend trip 10 years ago, and tossed them into the trunk of his black Mercedes. "Let's go," Robert said, checking his gold watch. "I have a meeting at 2, and I want to get this over with." Rose helped Anthony into the back seat. As the car pulled out of the driveway, Rose looked back at the house with the green door. She saw her daughter-in-law already standing in the front yard with a tape measure, probably planning how to turn the rose garden into a paved driveway for a second car. She closed her eyes and held Anthony's hand. His palm was cold, and he was trembling. They drove in silence for 40 minutes. Robert stayed on the highway, his eyes fixed on the road, while Sandra sat in the passenger seat, tapping away on her laptop, probably calculating how much the house would sell for once the old people smell was gone. Suddenly, the car slowed down on a dusty, desolate shoulder of the highway. There was nothing but dry grass and shimmering heat waves as far as the eye could see. "What are we doing?" Rose asked, a spike of fear hitting her chest. "The facility is another 3 miles up the road." Robert pulled the car into park and hopped out. "Car's acting up," he lied, his voice completely flat. "The engine is overheating. I can't risk driving it any further with the AC on. You 2 will have to walk the rest of the way. It's just around the next bend. It'll be good for your legs." He opened the back door and pulled them out. He dropped their 2 bags in the dirt at their feet. Sandra didn't even get out of the car. She just waved a hand through the tinted glass. "We'll come by on Sunday to check on you," Benjamin shouted from the back, his voice muffled by the window. Before Rose could even find the words to protest, before she could tell them that Anthony's heart couldn't handle a 100-yard walk, let alone 3 miles in the noon sun, the Mercedes roared to life. Robert shifted into gear, and with a spray of gravel, the car sped away, leaving the 2 elderly grandparents standing in the middle of nowhere. The sun was a physical weight on Anthony's shoulders as the silence of the highway swallowed the sound of the departing Mercedes. He stood there, one hand gripping his walking stick and the other clutching the small, frayed handle of a suitcase that contained 50 years of a life reduced to 3 shirts and a pair of spare trousers. Beside him, Rose was already scanning the horizon. Her eyes, once bright and full of the mischief that had captured Anthony's heart at a village dance in 1974, were now narrowed against the glare, searching for a mercy that wasn't coming. "They aren't coming back, Anthony," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a woman finally letting go of a rope she had been blistered by for years. They said the car was overheating. Anthony wheezed, his chest tightening. The heat was radiating off the asphalt in shimmering waves, distorted spirits dancing on the blacktop. Robert, he's a lawyer, Rose. He wouldn't lie about a car. Rose looked at her husband, the man who had worked double shifts at the steel mill until his lungs were gray, the man who had skipped dinner so Benjamin could have the latest sneakers. She saw the sweat bead on his pale forehead and the way his knees were beginning to buckle. He's not a lawyer today, Tony. He's just a man who wants to be rid of us. They began to walk. Every step was a battle against the thick, suffocating air. Anthony's breath came in ragged, shallow gulps. He tried to think of the grandchildren, little Leo and Mia. He tried to remember the way they smelled like baby powder and grass, the way they would climb onto his lap and ask for stories about the olden days. He realized with a jolt of pure agony that Sandra had probably already told them that Grandma and Grandpa had gone on a long trip. She had probably already packed their toys into the attic to make room for a home office. A sleek silver SUV roared past them, the wind from its wake nearly knocking Anthony off his feet. Then a red sports car. Then a delivery truck. To the drivers behind those tinted windows, they were just two flashes of gray and floral print. Scenery to be ignored. Anthony's heart gave a sudden, sickening thud, like a bird slamming into a window pane. He stumbled, his walking stick skittering across the gravel. Rose caught him, her small frame straining under his weight as they collapsed onto a concrete barrier. "Stay with me, Anthony. Look at me," she pleaded, wiping his forehead with the hem of her apron. That was when the sound changed. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a luxury engine. It was a low, rhythmic chug, the sound of a machine that had seen better days but refused to give up. A battered, sun-faded sedan with a mismatched blue door pulled onto the shoulder, kicking up a cloud of red dust. The driver's door creaked open, and a young man stepped out. He was wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit with the name Marcos embroidered over the pocket. He didn't look like the professional staff the children had promised. He looked like a man who spent his days under the bellies of broken cars. "Hey! Hey! Are you okay?" Marcos shouted, running toward them. He didn't ask for a credit card. He didn't ask if they had insurance. He simply saw an old man turning blue in the face and a woman who looked like she was holding up the world. He scooped Anthony up with the ease of someone who used his muscles for honest work. "My car isn't much, but the AC works. Get in. Now." As Marco sped toward the nearest hospital, he kept glancing in the rearview mirror. "What happened? Did your car break down? Where's your family?" Rose looked out the window at the passing telephone poles. "Our family is exactly where they want to be," she said, her voice trembling for the first time. "We were told we were a burden. We were told we were too expensive to keep." Marcos gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't say much for the rest of the drive, but he drove like a man possessed. When they reached the emergency room, he didn't just drop them off. He stayed. He sat in those hard plastic chairs for 6 hours, his grease-stained clothes standing out against the sterile white walls. When the doctor finally emerged to say that Anthony was stable but needed rest and a stress-free environment, Marcos stood up. He looked at Rose, who was sitting alone with her 2 small bags, looking smaller than he had ever imagined a person could be. "I have a spare room," Marcos said, his voice rough. "It's in a small house, and the neighborhood is loud because of the kids playing soccer, but it's cool. My wife, Anna, she makes a soup that could wake the dead. You can't go to a facility feeling like this." "We have no money to pay you, young man," Rose said. "Our children, they have the accounts." Marcos smiled, and for the first time that day, the air felt breathable. "My grandmother died in a home where nobody knew her name. I couldn't get to her in time. Consider this me getting to her." For the next week, Rose and Anthony lived in a world they hadn't known existed for years. A world of kindness without a price tag. Anna, Marcos's wife, didn't complain about the price of eggs. She brought them fresh ones from the neighbor's coop and sat with Rose, learning how to knit the complicated patterns Rose had stored in her head. Marco spent his evenings sitting on the porch with Anthony, listening to stories about how to lay a foundation that would never crack. But while the sun was setting peacefully on Marcos's porch, a storm was brewing in a mahogany row office across town. Daniel Cole, a senior partner at one of the city's oldest law firms, was losing his patience. He sat behind a desk made of ancient oak, staring at a stack of returned certified letters. For 3 years, he had been trying to reach Anthony, the estate of Anthony's estranged grandfather, a man who had built half the city's skyline before retreating into a silent, wealthy solitude, had finally been settled. $20 million, Daniel muttered, rubbing his temples. And I can't find the man. He looked at the signature on the most recent delivery receipt. Sandra Miller. He pulled up the file. Sandra was the daughter. He had spoken to her 3 times. Each time, she had told him her father was indisposed or suffering from advanced dementia, and that all financial matters should be directed to her. But something didn't sit right. Anthony's grandfather had left a very specific clause. The inheritance was to be delivered in person to ensure the heir was being cared for. Daniel decided to do something he rarely did. He left his office. He drove to the address on file, the house with the green door. When he arrived, he didn't find an elderly man in the twilight of his life. He found a construction crew tearing out a rose garden. He found Sandra standing on the porch, pointing a finger at a contractor. "Where is Anthony?" Daniel asked, stepping over a pile of discarded bricks. Sandra turned, her face twisting into a mask of polite concern. "Oh, Mr. Cole, I told you my father is in a very exclusive facility. He's not fit for visitors. If you have the check, I can deposit it into the family trust immediately. I've already prepared the paperwork." Daniel looked at the bricks. They were the ones Anthony had laid 40 years ago. He looked at the dumpster in the driveway, where a framed wedding photo of Rose and Anthony lay cracked under a pile of old drywall. "I don't need the trust paperwork, Sandra," Daniel said, his voice turning cold. "I need to see the heir. And if I find out you've been signing his name while he's tucked away in a warehouse, the $20 million will be the least of your worries." Fraud carries a very long sentence. Sandra's face went pale. The accountant brain began to whir, calculating the risk. She didn't know that at that very moment, Marcos was helping Anthony walk down the street to the local park, where the neighborhood kids were already shouting, "Grandpa Tony, watch this." Daniel Cole didn't wait for Sandra to come up with another lie. He walked back to his car, his mind racing. He had spent 30 years identifying the difference between a grieving daughter and a predator, and Sandra Miller was vibrating with the kind of frantic energy that only comes from a hidden crime. He pulled out his phone and made a single call to a private investigator he kept on retainer for difficult estate settlements. "Find Anthony Miller," he commanded. "Check every cut-rate care facility within a 50-mile radius of the city, and do it before sunset." While the investigator began his grim search, the atmosphere at Marcos's small yellow house was the polar opposite of the tension at the mansion. Anthony was sitting in a mismatched lawn chair on the porch, his pale skin finally catching a hint of healthy color. For the first time in years, he wasn't being told to move, to be quiet, or to stop wasting resources. Marcos was under the hood of a rusted truck in the driveway, wiping grease from his forehead. "Hey, Tony, pass me that 10mm wrench, would you?" Anthony leaned forward, his joints protestingly slightly, but his heart feeling lighter than it had since the day he retired. He handed the tool to the young man. "You're doing it wrong, son," Anthony said with a small, knowing smirk. "You tighten that bolt too much, and the gasket's gonna blow before you hit the freeway. Give it a quarter turn and let the heat seal it." Marcos laughed, a genuine booming sound. "See? This is why I need you around. My own dad never taught me how to fix a sandwich, let alone an engine." Inside, Rose was in the kitchen with Anna. They weren't counting eggs. They were making a massive pot of chicken stew, the steam filling the house with a scent that smelled like safety. Rose felt a strange sense of peace. She missed her home, the one with the green door, but she realized that the house hadn't been a home for a long time. It had been a prison guarded by her own children. The peace was shattered 2 hours later when a black sedan, not the Mercedes, but a professional-looking town car, pulled up to the curb. Daniel Cole stepped out, followed by a man holding a clipboard. They had tracked the Mercedes GPS to the highway shoulder, and then interviewed the highway patrol until they found a report of a Good Samaritan in a faded sedan. Daniel walked up the path, eyes landing on Anthony. He pulled a photograph from his breast pocket, compared it to the man on the porch, and let out a long, relieved breath. "Mr. Anthony Miller? My name is Daniel Cole. I've been looking for you for 3 years." Anthony stood up slowly, leaning on his stick. "If you're here about the medical bills, talk to my daughter. She handles everything." "Actually, Mr. Miller," Daniel said, stepping onto the porch and ignoring the grease on the floor, "I'm here because your daughter has been handling things she had no right to touch. She told me you were in a high-end facility. She told me you were unable to speak for yourself. Seeing you here, helping this young man with his truck, tells me a very different story." Daniel opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a single, thick document. "Your grandfather, Silas Miller, passed away in Switzerland 3 years ago. He left a legacy of real estate holdings, stocks, and cash. After taxes and fees, the total sits at $20 million. It is yours, Anthony, entirely, but there's a catch." Rose came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "A catch? The catch," Daniel said, looking at the two of them with a rare, genuine smile, "is that the money cannot be touched by anyone but you. Silas knew his great-grandchildren were, let's say, ambitious. He stipulated that if any of them tried to move you into a facility against your will or seize your assets, they would be permanently disinherited. I believe your daughter Sandra and your sons Robert and Benjamin have just triggered that clause." The silence on the porch was absolute. Anthony looked at the document, then at Marcos, who was standing in the driveway with his jaw hanging open. "$20 million? Anthony whispered. "I could have bought 10,000 eggs." Rose let out a short, wet laugh, tears pricking her eyes. "We could have bought the whole farm, Tony." But Anthony's expression didn't stay shocked for long. It hardened. He thought of the blistering heat on the highway. He thought of the way Sandra had looked at him like he was a stain on her expensive rug. He thought of the grandchildren who were being taught that love was something you discard when it gets expensive. "Mr. Cole," Anthony said, his voice dropping an octave, "I want to see my children. I want to see them one last time. Invite them to the old house tomorrow morning. Tell them the inheritance is ready to be settled. But don't tell them I'm the one settling it." The next morning, the mansion with the green door was buzzing. Robert, Sandra, and Benjamin were all there, dressed in their finest mourning clothes, though their eyes were bright with greed. They had even brought the grandchildren, Leo and Mia, who were sitting on the stairs looking confused. "I'm telling you," Sandra whispered to Robert. "Cole said the check is ready. Once we get it, we pay off your firm's debt, I get the beach house, and we can finally stop pretending we care about that care facility bill." "What about Mom and Dad?" Benjamin asked, looking slightly guilty. "Should we tell them?" "Tell them what?" Robert snapped. "They're happy where they are. They have professional staff. Remember?" The front door opened. But it wasn't Daniel Cole who walked in first. It was Marcos, wearing a clean suit that looked a little tight in the shoulders. Behind him came Rose, wearing a silk dress she hadn't touched in 20 years. And finally, Anthony, walking tall, his silver hair brushed back, his eyes like flint. The silence that hit the room was deafening. Sandra dropped her designer handbag. Robert's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. "Grandpa!" Leo and Mia shouted, breaking the tension as they ran to hug Anthony's legs. Anthony didn't look at the kids. Not yet. He looked at his 3 grown children. "The professional staff was a little busy today," Anthony said, his voice echoing in the hallway he had built. "So I decided to come and handle the accounting myself." Sandra stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Dad, the car, it was a mistake. We were coming back for you. We just had to get the engine fixed and—" "The car was fine, Sandra," Anthony interrupted. "I know cars. You know numbers. But it seems you forgot how to count the most important thing." Daniel Cole stepped forward, holding 3 small, white envelopes. As the executor of the Silas Miller estate, I am here to finalize the distribution. Per the disinheritance clause, triggered by the documented abandonment and attempted fraud of the heir, Robert, Sandra, and Benjamin Miller are hereby removed from all future claims to the Miller fortune. He handed each of them an envelope. Inside was a single $1 bill and a copy of the Highway Patrol report from the day they were abandoned. "You wanted the house," Anthony said, looking around the living room. "Well, you can have it. I've already paid off the remaining mortgage. It's yours. But the money, the land, the legacy, that stays with people who know what a home actually is." "You can't do this," Robert yelled, the lawyer in him finally waking up. "We're your children." "You were my children," Anthony said firmly. "Now you're just people I used to know." He turned to Marcos and Anna, who were standing by the door. "Marcos, I need a manager for a new project. We're buying the old estate on the hill, the one with 30 acres. We're going to build a place called Rose House. It's going to be a home for grandparents who have been told they're too expensive to keep. And I want you to run the garage. Every senior there is going to have a car that works and a place to go." As Rose and Anthony walked out of the house for the last time, holding their grandchildren's hands, they didn't look back at the three siblings screaming at each other in the foyer. They walked toward Marcos's rusted sedan, which felt more like a limousine than anything Robert had ever owned. Anthony sat in the back seat, pulled Rose close, and looked at the $20 million check in his pocket. He realized that the greatest wealth wasn't the numbers on the paper. It was the fact that for the first time in 50 years, he was finally going home.